Okay, guys, welcome to episode 20 of Drat and Drake Veterinary Podcast.
How's it going?
I think everyone, this is like also kind of like a pet peeve of mine, but I can't help it because, again, I'm like super excited about this episode, but it's always like, today we have a special guest. Like every guest is special. And of course, I have to say this is a special moment because this is someone who's, although has dabbled in the veterinary field very lightly in the past, is essentially completely out of the veterinary field. And this is a segment that I really wanted to try out. I'm going to call it Veterinary Exchange, where we're really going to dive into what their lifestyle is like and eventually kind of flip it over. And they get to ask us what it's like to be a vet or anything that we have to go through. So today's guest is Kirsten Winkelbauer. Okay. She is a freelance illustrator and designer currently living in Portland, Oregon. The way I know her is I grew up with her and I went to high school with her back in essentially Millbrae, California. Mills High School, class of 2008. I'm going to reiterate this. Her website or her Instagram is WinkleBB. Okay. That's B as in the animal twice, or also winklebb.com. All right. Hi, Kirsten. How you doing today? Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing really well. How are you guys doing?
Oh,
awesome.
I think, what's the weather like today in Florida? Because we're both in Florida now. It's 79
Same.
degrees.
As always. Never
Uh,
changes.
I specifically moved to Portland because I don't like sunny weather. So
Fair.
that sounds horrible to me. 79 sounds terrible.
Well, it must be like 49 and like drizzling. Is that Portland?
It's gray. It's not drizzling yet, but it's supposed to. It's like
going
50.
to be.
It's 50. No, we actually have really warm summers, which I was very disappointed to find out. So that's a bummer. So dream crushed.
I've been to Portland once. It wasn't bad. No taxes.
It wasn't bad.
No,
Yeah, there's no sales tax here. That's what we got going for us up here.
That's good. Yeah, I'm a fan of the clouds.
Oh yeah.
My wife hates clouds, whereas for me it's like I love when it's like super overcast. It's like a little blanket.
Yeah. When it's
But
too bright, it makes my eyes hurt. So I like the weather here. Most people prefer the sun. That's definitely just like a me thing. But
well, Kirsten, tell me, like, what have you been up to the last 16 years, and how did you get yourself into the field that you're in, and how'd you end up in Portland?
I was already interested in art back in high school, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do afterwards. So after, kind of going to community college and messing around, I ended up taking a tour of an art school in San Francisco, kind of by accident. Someone else I knew was taking a tour, and I just went with them just to check it out. And I ended up applying the next day, and I was like, I want to go to art school. This is great. So I went to Academy of Art University in San Francisco, and I graduated from there.
That's amazing. That's so cool.
I have thoughts on art school. I definitely have thoughts on art school. Okay. But at the time, it was really fun. It was really fun. I made a lot of friends that I still know, and it was a really good experience for me. And that was kind of like, basically at some time around like 20 years old, I was like, oh, people can actually do this as a career. Maybe I'll try that out. This is kind of the only thing I really like doing enough, I think, to pursue it. So I ended up doing like a little bit of freelance here and there. I started applying to do markets and conventions and selling originally just like artwork and stickers and things like that. And pre-pandemic, I was doing that pretty regularly. Like I was still working part-time at random part-time jobs, but I was doing conventions and markets often enough that was most of my income. Then the pandemic happened and conventions and markets stopped for like 3 years. And I decided to go full freelance, and I was doing freelance gigs and stuff for the last few years. And I've kind of stuck with it, trying to get back into markets and conventions now. But it was really one of those things that I just kept looking for more and more opportunities where I could sell the stuff that I was making in an attempt to get away from having a part-time job, basically.
Totally. Now you mentioned that, so I think you briefly mentioned that when in art school you focused on illustration. Is that, can you tell me more about college and how does that work? Because for example, in vet school, large animal, small animal, but you still kind of study all of it until you decide what you want to get into. Right?
Oh, absolutely. So it's very much like any college, really, where like the first couple of years are for like the basics that cover everything, and then you kind of find a specialization. So first couple of years is the same for everybody. You do focus on life drawing, figure drawing, like you learn how to draw things in real life. Because once you know how to draw things in real life, you can't really like break the rules until you know them. So it's really hard to have a convincing style unless you know some life drawing. So after that, you can branch off. They have a bajillion different focuses. Like I had friends in animation, character design. Like there's some people who went into digital. There was also sculpture, mixed media, that kind of stuff. So I went into illustration because I honestly thought I wanted to do children's book illustration. Like I really
Hmm.
thought that's what I wanted to do. And then I ended up not doing that at all and doing something completely different. But a lot of the stuff that I learned in school I've been able to apply it to what I do, which is great. But what
Yeah.
I actually went to school for, not doing that at all.
Okay. Is illustrations primarily, is that a pretty broad term in terms of tools, like paintbrush is still illustration and all that?
Yeah, so it is a really broad thing that can cover a lot of stuff, but it's basically not life drawing. So it's like not based off real life. It's like more of a
Okay.
stylized thing, but it's not animation and it's not something like character design where you're creating specific characters or scenarios like for an end product, like for a movie or for a game or anything. It's not like video game design.
Okay.
It's more our school tended to focus on the aspect of kids book illustration because that was what a lot of people were going into it for, but it could absolutely branch off to like a bunch of other things as well. But when you think of a kid's book illustration, like that's what people think of when they think of like illustration. So it's that kind of like a little bit cartoony, not realistic,
Mhm.
that kind of thing. But it's
So,
super broad, like any medium could be done
okay.
like illustration.
So there's almost a distinction compared to the what you studied versus, let's say, like character design. Your
Mhm.
skill set or training is based on more of a large variety of facial types and facial features and structures.
Oh, for sure. And the thing about art is the more I've thought about this a lot since I've left school, but you kind of have to pick a certain thing to teach because like art is so broad that there isn't
Yeah.
really a way to encapsulate all of it. But the way you can look at it kind of is character design is a subset of illustration, but it is very specific and you learn things that you wouldn't learn in an illustration class. So like say you're
Hmm.
designing a character for a game, what you would be learning is how to draw that character doing a full 360 from
Hmm.
every side so they look consistent, knowing how to draw models so like everything is consistent, learning how to place them in an environment, learning how to potentially take that into like 3D modeling, that kind of thing. So you're taking what you've learned in illustration, which is how to draw a character, and then you're branching it off into a different field. Whereas you could take that same character that you've learned and turn it into a kid's book or turn it into a mascot for ad design or something like that. So you're kind of learning how to draw the thing that could then be turned into a different field or a different product or something like
Okay.
that. So it was kind
Interesting.
of like the basic of learning how to draw and paint. Huge focus on like color theory and stuff too. So you're learning all of the
Nice.
like basics and huge focus on watercolors for
Hmm.
whatever reason. And then
Children's, I bet, children's
yeah,
book
for that kind
style.
of thing. And then some digital stuff too, which I was not a digital artist when I went into college. I was like, I want to do watercolors. I hate digital art. I think it's so boring. And then I found out there was a mandatory digital art class for graduation that I tried to get out of. And they were like, no, you have to take it. And I did. And it turned out not only did I like it, I was really good at it. And that got me into graphic design. And that was my first job out of college was as an in-house graphic designer. So
Nice.
thanks, my director, for not letting me drop out of that class. I appreciate it.
That's really cool. It's crazy how things you kind
That's
of
good they
fall
did
into it,
that.
right? All
Yeah,
right,
I
Remy,
absolutely wasn't expecting it.
I'm gonna steal another question. I know Remy's kind of waiting in line for this, but very quick, what are your thoughts on artists out there who did not go to art school? And can you tell some artists didn't learn the basics?
No.
You
Art
can't
school
tell.
is
Oh,
okay. Here's my thoughts on art school. I think at some point in time, I think it was absolutely necessary because there wasn't a place where all of those things, like all that information, was available to people in like one location. In
mhm.
our current day and age, with access to the internet, with like sharing information, with free resources out there, I don't know that art school, and again, this is my opinion, I'm not trying to
Sure.
like be inflammatory, but I don't know that it's absolutely a necessary thing, not only because a lot of the resources could be found for free elsewhere, but also unless you're in like a very specific field or you're somewhere like a big company that wants very specific credentials, you can fully have your own small business or like regular work without even having a degree. Like I have a
Mm,
degree, not one job I've been at has asked for it. No one has checked for it because they need to see that you know how to do it. For me, art school was really valuable because I have a huge problem with attention and focus. Like I have ADHD, it's really difficult for me to focus on stuff. So having structure is what helped me. Like if I had to just go and learn those things on my own, I probably wouldn't have been able to do it. But those resources are out there. Like I don't know
Mm.
that art school is the end all be all for someone who wants to be an artist. Like you don't have to go to art school to be an artist, like at all. And so I always tell people like don't not go if you want to, but like think about it. It's expensive, it's time consuming, and it might not end up being something that you actually need.
Okay.
So then where do you see training for artists going in like 10 years?
I feel like if art schools and like universities are going to stay as a place for people to go, they are going to have to adjust for the current landscape of the art field, because I think the problem, and we might end up talking about this, is that I don't think the current art school, well, at least the one I went to, is equipped to deal with how the landscape has changed. So nowadays, with social media and with how quickly things change and how kind of oversaturated everything has become,
Hmm.
in order to be able to deal with that, I think art schools are going to have to focus much more on like the marketing and the social media aspect and less on the actual teaching aspect, because there's almost no point in teaching artists how to do all these things if they can't do anything with them after. So I do see teaching being a thing, but I see a lot more of it being online. I see a lot more of it being available for free and not just at these institutions that used to kind of be unattainable to some people. I see it being much more easily accessed, but I also see there being a shift towards the stuff that isn't just the drawing,
Mm-hmm.
because the a lot of my teachers, fantastic artists, much older, were in living in a time and getting jobs in a time where the internet wasn't even a thing. And so they had already established their careers by the time they were teaching. They had been doing advertisement art, kids books. Like my one of my teachers, she's done like 20 kids books. Like she's set, but she started doing that 35, 40 years ago, and it wasn't a thing. Like you could get a publisher and it was a much more kind of like exclusive thing. And now with self-publishing and self-marketing and self whatever, it's not the same. You can't just go out and get a job as an artist the same way that you used to be able to. So I think all those things are going to
Interesting.
have to be addressed in order to be useful, because I don't know necessarily that just teaching art is as useful as it used to be.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess not, I know nothing about the art school curriculum, but do they not teach any sort of business or economics of art or anything like that?
There is, I remember one class that was, and mind you, I graduated in like 2015. It's been a minute, but like there was one class that we did have to take, and that one definitely involved us learning how to like find resources. We had to make lists of like potential contacts and like agents and things like that. But that was one class for one semester out of what it was essentially a 4-year program. And so if you think about, I fully appreciate everything they taught us in the sense that like I learned a lot about art and the other stuff that we did was super interesting. But we had to have like a history credit because it's a college. You have to have like a history class. So I took a history of comic books class, which fascinating. Absolutely does not help me in my real life whatsoever. Wrote a great paper on Wonder Woman, but again, never helped me in my life at all. So I'm like, that's fantastic. And I'm glad I know it, but I would have loved like a much more in-depth marketing class, business class. That one class kind of touched on everything, but not super specifically. And I just don't think it was enough to prepare us in the same way that I feel like high school doesn't prepare you for like taking out student loans and filing taxes. Like I feel like
Yeah.
there's like a
Fair.
huge gap in education to prepare people for the real world. And that's the same in college.
Yeah. We could say the
But
same for
then,
vet school. We didn't learn anything
Yeah.
about
yeah, I mean,
business
it's
or
no, I mean,
you
I
know.
think a lot of industries have that dynamic as far as like the pipeline of education versus how the real world actually works. But
Yeah.
I mean, where do you think that's coming from specifically in the art world? Like, do you feel that it's just because there's not enough artists going into teaching that, it's a lot of, if they can get anyone to teach the class, then that's who they roll with? Or how does that,
I'm
like,
not
where's it coming
entirely
from?
I'm not entirely sure. So I mean, I know the standards for teachers at our school were pretty high. Like they had to be people who are like working in the art industry. I don't know if I could say why there isn't more information, at least again in my school, cannot speak for any other schools, about like how to market yourself after. But I guess you could ask the same question, like, why aren't there more classes for that in high school to teach you to prepare for the real world in general? Like
Mhm.
either there isn't the funding for it, or there's not enough interest in it, or it's just not prioritized. I just feel like there's probably a lot of reasons why schools feel like it's just not worth it, because like we're here to teach you how to be an artist. We're not here to teach you how to do this other stuff. We're here to teach you how to know how to like look at a form and understand it and like render it. Like that's what we're supposed to be teaching you.
Mhm.
And so it almost, and again, my opinion, sometimes felt like, look, we did our job. The rest of it's your job. We're here to teach you how to be an artist. What you do with it after that, that's kind of on you. So that was sometimes the vibe I got. Could have been just me. It could have just been my particular school, but it kind of felt like the art is the focus, not that other stuff.
I apologize for the technical difficulties with my Wi-Fi. That was on me. Okay.
See, technology, it ruins everything. We'll talk about AI later. Sad.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah.
But yeah, Brendan was asking about laser cutting stuff.
Yeah, so I guess to kind of pick up on, I don't know where it fell out, but I absolutely love all of like your wood-based art, which I don't even know like kind of how that sphere of art works. Like, is it one of those things where there's like a defined way of doing something and like accepted practices, and then from there you branch out, or is it something that's very much like, here's how to use basic like wood carving tools, and then from there you just run with it?
I think there's probably a divide. Like I think my opinion on it is probably a little different than some people. So I do laser cut wood using like a laser cutter. And I got into that back 2016 because I used to work at a makerspace. Are you guys familiar with what a makerspace is?
No
It's
idea.
basically usually it's owned and is like for profit and stuff, but it's like a community base where they have a lot of tools and equipment for makers. You could have a membership, and
Okay.
they have like woodworking, metalworking, like all kinds of stuff like that. And I got a job at one as a receptionist back when I was doing part-time work, and they had laser cutting and you could take all the classes for free if you worked there. So I started doing it for funsies. And
Cool.
found out it tied in really easily with the stuff that I did. So I told you I had to take a digital art class. Turns out the digital art that I was doing, which is vector based digital art, is what you need to do laser cutting. And so I was like, I can just take the stuff that I have and just like cut it into wood. And so I started experimenting with that, and it turned into what I do now. But I think to your question of whether or not there's like a certain kind of standard, I would say there isn't. I think if you know how to use a medium, do whatever you want with it. Like what I started doing versus what I do now versus like what I'm experimenting with right now, all just whatever I feel like doing. I think in woodworking in general, there are people who are a little bit more of purists, or people who are a little bit of a set of like laser cutting isn't the same as woodworking because you're not like hand carving, or you're not, what's it called, using a lathe or anything like that. So there's always been a little bit of like, I was just talking to my boyfriend about this, about people haven't been rude or mean about it, but if you talk to certain sets of often like kind of older
Of
men
course.
about it, you get that kind of like, oh, that's really cute that you're doing that. And it's like, thanks, man. It still takes a lot of work. Like, yeah, I didn't build a table, but
Yeah.
like, I
And
still
yours is
made
more
something that was,
precise.
yeah.
Yours
So
looks
I'm like,
better.
kind of like, exactly. So I do feel like there's that, even if it's unconscious, that bias towards, well, a computer does part of the work for you. It's like a computer, it's basically like a CNC, like a computer controlled kind of thing. So like the computer's doing the work for you, but it's like, yeah, but I had to design it. And I'm not just taking like a piece of wood and etching it and it's done. I design things that have to be pieced together or built out
Mm.
and stuff. And so it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of time.
Oh,
Like
I
from
bet.
start to finish, a single piece could take days to finish. And so even though like it's not the same as traditional woodworking, it definitely still takes a lot of work and effort,
Yeah.
I think. But I personally don't think there are any particular rules to it. I know people more in kind of my age group and also more of kind of like in the illustration sphere don't think there are any particular rules to it. And I tend to prefer that because it doesn't limit what you're able to do. And people seem to like what I'm making. So that's cool.
So in terms of like this like Mike, the knowledge that I know, or just the familiarity I have with laser wood cutting is a relatively small piece of wood that you work with. Can you tell me what the extent, like what are the boundaries, or what are the lack of boundaries that you can make with what kind of art? I think of like some type of like signage is a big one that you can do with it, or
Mhm.
plaques, or something more of a flat, relatively flat thing. But yeah, what do people actually, what
You
are
laser
the
cut a whole
options?
house.
I know, right?
So
Like,
yeah,
what do you,
you
a
could.
table? Like,
You could if you had the space for it. So since I moved to Portland, I'm sure there are maker spaces around here, but I do not know of any. So I no longer have like a maker space to go to. So I have a home unit. It's called the Glow Forge. It's kind of like an
Glow
entry level like
Forge.
home
I
user
gotta look
type
that up.
situation.
Uh-huh.
It's really cool. It's not definitely not as powerful as like an industrial grade one.
Oh,
It's not as big as an industrial grade one, which you can buy them, but they're like $15,000, and I was not going to do that. So I have a smaller unit, and there are limitations in size
mhm,
on that one. The bed size, I believe, is 12 by 20,
mhm.
which for me, since I do a lot of jewelry and like small stuff, that's totally fine. They do have a pro version that I did not get that has a removable panel, so you can feed in larger pieces of wood. And so like it'll etch, you can kind of like, you know,
It's
use
seven
bigger
thousand
pieces of wood.
dollars.
It's $7 bajillion.
What was
You'll
the
be
name of the
paying it off
model?
forever.
Glow
I'm sorry?
Forge.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Glow Forge.
Glow
I'm looking
And
it up
Forge.
right now. That's cool.
it's certainly not like it does the job well. It's
Yeah,
not the best laser in the entire world. It definitely is more
sure.
Oh wow.
finicky than like a CO2 laser or something like that.
Uh,
But I can use it at home. I have it out in the garage. Like the filtration system is literally like a vent out the window. Like it's not super
cool.
complicated. You don't need a crazy anything. So setup is super simple. It allows me to cut stuff at home. Super great, but it's not as powerful. So I can't cut through as thick of wood,
Mm,
and I can't cut super big pieces. I'm used to working on bed sizes that were like 18 by 24, which
okay.
is when you're limited in one direction to 12 inches, like you can only go so big.
So
So if I
far.
want to do something bigger than that, I have to cut it into smaller pieces and assemble it.
Mhm.
And originally, when I started, it was just doing things like pins and jewelry and keychains and stuff, like flat pieces. And then I started doing more layered pieces where it would be like a
Mm.
design, like kind of stacked on top of each other. And I still do that. I have gotten much more detailed with it where I'll make like these little scenes that have like, through windows, you can see other
Yeah,
stuff.
that's
But I
so
recently
cool.
started experimenting. Actually, I have this here because I was talking to my boyfriend about the mechanics of it. I know
Uh-huh.
this is like not a video thing, but I started learning how to make living hinges, which is where you can make it rounded.
Oh,
So
it's so
it like
cool.
it
Oh,
can
that's
bend.
wild.
And I was like, whoa, that's really cool. So I'm making these, those like vintage, like Italian, like tinned fish box type
Uh-huh.
situations.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So I started making these so I could make like a box. Like, yeah,
Ooh.
this is
Love
not correct. But yeah, like that. And then I have like the lids with like, and it'll like piece together and stack into an actual like box.
Okay.
So I sell like that kind of things, like organizers, trinket boxes, things that like,
Board game organizers? Because that's a
dude, that
huge
is on the
market.
list. That is
Huge
on the
market.
list. That is on the list for me right now because we play a lot of board games, and it bothers us so much how hard it is to reorganize stuff in
Oh.
boxes. And I was like, I have in the works still designing it because my brain works faster than like my hands. I'm trying to design like a modular system that's customizable so you can buy pieces that fit together
Yes.
and can be
Yes.
customized for specific games that you want. And I know some people sell them and they're functional, but I don't like just functional. I want it to also be
Look
pretty.
pretty.
Like I would like it to
Yeah.
have like not sharp, hard edges, like some rounded edges, like slots that are removable and
Oh, that's
changeable.
so exciting.
So I am in the process of designing it because I
Yeah.
want it to be much more specific. But yes, I'm trying to
Yeah.
work on that right now.
Have you guys ever played Wingspan?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We don't own that one,
Okay.
but I liked all the pieces in it. It was really
So
nice.
I have that and the 3 expansions that come with it.
Oh my
And
God, that's so much.
oh, it's amazing. And there's I don't like the frustrating part is I'll bring it over to a friend's house and I have to bring
Mhm.
all 4 boxes because it doesn't
Yeah.
work. So if there's like a dedicated, beautiful laser and crafted box for it, that would be amazing. Like yeah.
That's my dream. I want to make custom ones, but
And
I mentioned before I have attention problems, so I'll get ideas for things and I'm like, this is great, and I'll be obsessed with it for like 2 weeks, and then I get
yeah.
another idea, and so as many things as I've finished, I probably have twice as many like partially
Sure.
finished. So it's in there in like the graveyard of ideas that it'll probably happen someday, but it have to
Eh,
dig it back up at some
yeah.
point.
Well, it's good that you're busy then, right? So,
Yeah, yeah. Busy is good usually. It's a disorganized busyness, but it's good.
mm. Go ahead, Remy.
Yeah, I'm gonna take over here. Are you using like CAD software or
No,
what's the
so
design process?
there are some CNC machines that do use CAD software. That would for something like that, you would probably be using it for what is the machine? Like a CNC machine, something that has like a more router based, that's like more intense and that has depth involved in it. You would probably use that. I personally just use Illustrator, like Adobe Illustrator,
Oh wow. Okay.
because Programs usually for laser cutting are vector based. Like your artwork needs to be vector based. So it needs to be able to be exported as, I don't know how familiar you are with file types, but like an SVG or like an AI file, like it needs to be a vector. And there are other programs that do have that. Like there's Corel Draw and I think Inkscape, but I use Illustrator because it's just like what I have and it's what I'm familiar with. But it truly is not as technical as it sounds. I draw things in Illustrator and export the file. Yeah, so it's much less in depth than people think. It's the most complicated part about it when designing is like imagining how it's going to look once it's cut into 3D and stuff like that. So there is a little bit of like math and stuff involved, which I suck at. But yeah, it's usually just Illustrator is what I use for pretty much everything.
But then do you have problems with like the wood quality and like
Yes.
you make a design and then it doesn't work for that specific piece of wood? Is that a big difficulty?
Absolutely. So I try to use as good of quality. I use Baltic birch ply because it is the most cost efficient. Like you could use nicer wood, but a lot of times you're testing things and stuff. And if something gets messed up, you just screwed up a piece of wood that cost you $20. And it also drives up the price of what you're selling. So I use birch because it can be, you can treat it and make it like nice and smooth and everything like that. But yeah, it's not great in that these big sheets of plywood oftentimes will have like knots in them or like those pieces that they clearly like stuck together and stuff. So you get these weird seams and stuff. And so you definitely have to like take that into consideration. I have like a giant like garbage can under my laser cutter, like pieces that just like didn't work. And I'm just like, oh, I'm just gonna go scrap that or whatever. So a lot of times it doesn't always work. And also, it's such a bummer. I cut using 1/8 inch because it's the easiest to cut through. You don't have to run, if something's too thick, you have to run the laser multiple times and it burns the wood. So I use 1/8 inch and I stack pieces if I need them to be thicker. But when wood is that thin, I'm sure you've seen like a piece of plywood, it warps and it's not always super flat. So if it's not completely level on the laser bed, sometimes it's closer or further away from the actual laser. And so you pull out a piece and like half of it didn't actually cut all the way through and now you've moved it off the bed so you can't put it back and have it cut in the same place anymore, so you've just lost that piece and it's just like, well, crap, like this is trash now. So I have like piles of just like stuff that doesn't work, and that's a huge bummer because there is kind of a huge, you have to take into account how much you're wasting and like spending and stuff on that. So that's pretty painful. I've lost like sheets of stuff before.
That sounds like a true woodworker's dilemma.
It's the worst. It's absolutely the worst. Yeah, actually, no, it's not the worst, but all the other woodworking stuff, I like it. But oh my God, like the time I spend sanding, the amount of just like dust in all my crevices of like everything that I own, it's so bad. There's so much like wood dust like ingrained into like my leggings and stuff.
You should buy like a fume hood that they use for like scientific
honestly,
experiments. And
if I told my boyfriend I wanted one, he probably would, because like he does woodworking for fun. He does woodworking for fun, not
super cool.
He does actual woodworking. Like he built our media like unit over there, and like he builds furniture. Like he actually knows how to woodwork. And so if I was like, we should have like a sanding clean room, he'd be like, yeah, that's a good idea. No, don't encourage him to buy more equipment.
He's a software engineer. He can afford it.
No, we're trying to get rid of stuff, not get more. We already have a table saw, okay? Like we don't need more stuff.
I want
right
one
now.
so bad. I want a table saw so bad, but I don't. I don't have the space for it.
Yeah, we're lucky we have a garage, so we can like set up everything out there, which is really nice. It's really nice to have that kind of space for it.
All right. Well, I wanted to pivot back to a little bit more about your journey into your career. Remy, is that okay? Can I move on?
Yeah, no, go for it.
Okay. I'll get random bits of things on YouTube or Instagram about artists and they'll share a little bit of their story. One of the things that I find really interesting is like the discovery of an artist's quote style, right? You brought up like a really awesome quote where it's like I'm going to butcher it, but you have to know the rules before you break it, which I think is like a beautiful kind of thing behind art. And
which may have been Picasso who said something of that. Something like that has been floating around for a very long time. If he did say it, he probably stole it, like whatever.
Well, so a lot of, obviously, the way you start off learning art and practicing it is by essentially copying the form that you're taught. Can you explain to me your journey of then how you branched out and discovered your own style of where you are today?
Well, it's kind of hard for me to describe it.
Hmm.
I don't know that I have one specific style, which is it's great in terms of exploration of like doing different things. Like I have a bunch of different styles, not great for having a brand identity. I I get interested in something and that's what I want to do. And then unfortunately I end up having like my laser cutting stuff doesn't look anything like my illustration stuff. It really
Mm.
doesn't. But when you put it all together at like a market table, it's just it kind of goes together, so it's fine. But I feel like I got to where I was basically by like so before art school, all I wanted to draw was anime fan art. Like that's literally all I drew was like
I
Sailor
think I
Moon. Like
remember that. I think
yeah.
I had the Sailor Moon stuff.
I
That's
used
right.
all I was drawing was like, do you remember Minori?
Yeah.
She also, yeah, we would just draw anime stuff. She has like a bajillion followers on YouTube, by the way, now.
I met up with her in Japan when I was
Oh,
there.
that's
Yeah,
so cool.
she's
Yeah,
doing fantastic. She's
yeah, she's
yeah.
doing great. So that's all I wanted to do. And then I went to art school and they were like, you have to draw traditional. And then
Mm.
they didn't, when you started getting into more of the stylized stuff, you could kind of draw on the style you want, but they were still definitely a kind of like, this is kind of what sells. And there's definitely more of like you could tell there was more like respect for certain types of styles and stuff. And I was like, okay. And then I left school and I was like, I want to draw anime fan art. Like that's what I want to do, which I don't actually do that anymore very often. But I realized I was like, this is a thing I wanted to draw, not necessarily because like anime is my favorite thing, but I was like, what do I like about this? I like drawing really cute things and really colorful things and things that are kind of funny and just like things that I really like to draw things that like bring people joy. Like everything I do is very colorful and very cute and very kind of just like the number one thing people say is like, oh my God, this stuff is so adorable. And I'm like, good. That's what I want you to feel. So I had always had that. Went to art school. They told me all these rules, and I was like, cool, now I know them. I still just want to draw what I want to draw. So
Yeah.
I continue to do it, but now I know things like color theory and proportions and kind of perspective. That was like the one class I was not super great at. I'm not like, I can only draw really well organically, like anything that uses like rulers and measurements.
Hmm.
It's does not work for me like at all, never has. But I essentially just kept doing what I already liked, just like slightly better. And
Okay.
it's just gone from there where like I just like to experiment with things. And if something sounds fun or interesting, I'll try it. Or if a new medium sounds interesting, I'll just try it. But the back of my brain, like a lot of that information is still there where like I know what colors are going to work together, are going to look good together, or I know which materials will work. Like I do know
Mm.
how to use like watercolor technique that like I know how to do it, you know, so I know how to use these tools in a much more efficient way and a much more skilled way. But I basically just took what I was already doing and just refined it a little bit
Okay.
and kept doing that. Like I had no interest in drawing in one specific way that I was told to. So it's more about taking what works for you and then using those skills to continue what you actually enjoy.
Okay. And do you primarily use your iPad now, or is it more you take a picture of your watercolor or marker, whatever, and then translate that into your editing software?
Man, I wish I had a clear answer for any of that. I've used like six different mediums like last week.
Oh,
Like
okay. Cool.
so for digital, just illustration in general, just drawings that I post online. Digitally, I use my iPad for drawing.
Okay.
I like watercolors and
Mm.
markers is usually what I use. I also use colored pencils a lot. I generally have like a very large pencil bag that I carry with like a handful of different tools and like colors that go together. And I always have it with me and I always have a sketchbook with me. So I'm always
Mm.
doing that. And then digitally, I'm using, I don't really use Photoshop. I use like Illustrator to do digital vector designs. So it's just a completely different way of thinking. Like when I'm doing like the digital stuff for laser cutting, completely different mindset than when I'm doing like a marker or pen and ink illustration
Okay.
kind of thing. Yeah.
Very cool. Now, jumping into now, of course, we mentioned the lack of in academia, but the business aspect of your career. Tell me about, and you also mentioned how how things were different 35 years ago. I would imagine things were probably different even 10, 15 years ago to
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
How does an aspiring artist, let's say we have a veterinarian who's tired of treating sick animals, they love art on the side. How does one then, let's say they have the basics down. How do you, what is the platform that people use? How do you now advertise your brand and put yourself out there?
if you actually know someone like that, tell them not to do it. But like, I just, I,
Yeah.
it's really hard because it changes really quickly. Like you mentioned, like even 10 years ago, it was different. For a while, Instagram was it. Like it was like the first major app that was purely photo based. And
Yeah.
so it lent itself to something that was purely visual. Like you didn't have to dig through all of these other posts like you did on Facebook. And so for a while, that was where artists were thriving. Like that was where I had like my peak social media, like I have
Yeah.
steadily like declined, honestly. Like I've lost some followers. I don't get a ton of interaction anymore because I kind of stopped using it because Instagram has changed and not as many people are on it. But for a good like 5, 6 year period, like Instagram was it. I was posting every single day. I was getting,
I
like
remember.
thousands of like on stuff. It was great. And
Yeah.
then I burned myself out on it because the bummer about social media, whether it is Instagram or TikTok, which is where everyone is now, which is the bane of my existence, or
Yeah.
whatever's going to be next once that's banned in the United States or whatever. The problem is, in order to make the algorithm happy, you have to produce content at an extreme rate. You have to post every day and you have to be engaging with comments. You have to be tagging things correctly. A lot of the times you're paying to boost your posts, which I generally try not to do unless I have like a big event or a sale or something. But like you have to be posting constantly. And my mistake was when I first started doing that, I thought that meant you had to create unique content every single time.
Oh.
So I was like, because the thing is, like,
Oof.
I like to sketch and I don't do a ton of like huge illustration projects. I just like to draw and doodle. So for I think it was 5 or 6 years, I shit you not, I did I called them daily drawings. I did a new drawing post every single day
I
for like six
remember.
years. That's a lot of
Yeah.
freaking drawings. Like I have them all just like in notebooks somewhere, and I'm just like, it really, if someone wants to post on social media every single day, film parts of what you're doing and post it separately so you don't have to do a new thing every single time, or repost, like reuse parts and stuff like that, because I made that dumb mistake and I burned myself out. I hate social media. I hate making posts. I hate stopping what I'm doing to film and record what it like what the process is. Can't stand it. Everyone's like, you should do live streams. I'm like, no, absolutely like, no. I don't want to do that. Like I don't want to do any of these things. And so unfortunately I did burn myself out on it, but that's kind of the reality of it, is you need to
Yeah.
be on it constantly. So if you're going to market yourself, you need to be online, like posting stuff really frequently, but also limit it enough that it's not burning you out and not like ruining your mental health. Because if you're scrolling on TikTok and Instagram all day, all you see is successful artists or people that you think draw better than you, or people who are actually getting tons of sales and stuff. And that's a great way to make yourself feel really terrible about yourself. But you need to be a constant presence and you need to be able to talk to people a lot. And that is kind of my downfall, is that like I don't want to do that, which is why I lean more towards doing things like markets and conventions, because I'm much better at selling face to face than I
Yeah.
am creating content for the internet. I still do it begrudgingly, but oh, it's exhausting. It's so
I
exhausting. But
bet.
yeah, that
I
self
mean,
promotion, it's
we have a
awful.
podcast, right? And that's the whole part of like trying to, you see people like they'll have like 75 different clips from one video and they'll post it. And I haven't been
Yeah.
doing that just because of
Ye-
just the burnout that I did when I had it initially and all that. So,
exactly. And it's
yeah.
really hard to know kind of how to do it like in a way that's effective. And the other part of it, which sucks because there's nothing you can do about it, like half of it is luck. Like you
Mm.
post at the right time, the right person sees it, the algorithm picks it up, someone happens to share it. Like I've had drawings that I thought were really good that I posted like on TikTok, got, a few hundred views. I did a drawing of a frog eating Doritos, you know, 750,000 views. And I was like, come on, seriously, you guys. Like it's always the dumb crap like that. And then I made it into a sticker,
Yeah.
and that was the number one sticker that sold at my last show. And I was like, you come on, this I spent 3 days on this other painting, but no, the frog I drew for like a trend on TikTok, like a
Yeah.
music that was trending, is the one that is everyone cares about. I'm just like, ah. So it's, you never know what's actually going to do really well. Um,
Yeah.
which is why you have to post so often, because one of them is going to work eventually.
Fair enough.
Mhm.
Isn't that how it
Let's,
is? Like
yeah.
you never know what it is. You're just gonna,
No, it's the
and it's always the one that you don't
worst.
think it's gonna be.
Or the one that I'm like, this was a joke. Why don't you care about the one that I actually spent hours and hours on? This was
Right.
supposed to be a meme. Like, what is this? So it usually is like the ridiculous ones, or like I'll draw something that like is about just like artist burnout, or like, stereotypes about artists. And everyone's like, oh my God, I feel that. And that's the one that'll get a bunch of traction. And I'm like, why is it either the joke ones or the ones that like jokingly acknowledge that we're all just like miserable in this society are the ones that like
Yeah.
people like the most? It makes me like, oh,
I
maybe I'm
feel like
trying too hard with this stuff.
satire
Yeah.
sometimes sells well, right? Or just
Yeah.
the irony of it.
Well, I was just gonna ask, like, kind of on that subject. I mean, with things that you put a lot of effort into
Hmm.
that don't actually get the reception that you want, and then the
Yeah.
things that you wouldn't think do well. How does that factor into your decision on like pricing things? Because I know for artists, it's like a whole thing about art doesn't pay as well as we'd like it to. It does,
Yeah.
but then how does that?
I So in terms of pricing, every artist is a little different. You generally want to make sure that you think about how long something takes and the materials that go into it. And so you're making sure you're covering the materials and the amount of time you spent on it. For that reason, I don't sell a lot of original stuff, because if something isn't
Mhm.
original, you only have one of them and it took you a really long time to do it, by that nature, you're going to have to charge a lot of money for it. And there are fewer people who are willing to spend that kind of money on art. Fortunately, Portland is a very art like loving community. So
Mhm.
a lot of galleries, a lot of people like to support artists here, but you can't bank on that, which is why I tend to go for things that are either reproducible or smaller and take less time, because you can charge less for them and ultimately make more sales doing that. So I'm not banking on someone buying something that costs $500. I'm banking on selling, 100 of these pins that cost $12. So it really, when I'm thinking about how I'm going to factor in pricing, I really have to think about like, it's kind of like any other production thing. It's like you minimize costs as much as possible to like maximize profits, which
Yeah.
I feel
No.
so awful saying that, because like when you think about it, it's literally like any other business. And that's the part that I feel like people are like, oh, you do art for a living and you get to make all this cool stuff. Yeah, lit, love it. But when I'm in the background, like calculating costs and calculating how much to charge people and calculating all of these things, it's literally like any other business. Like you're selling yourself, you're keeping track of like all of your income and what you're spending and all this kind of stuff. And it's not really fun. Like that part is not fun
Mhm.
at all. And I feel like people don't think about it. It's probably the same like in any field where everyone's like, oh, you get to like treat animals all day. And it's like, yeah, that's only like a portion. Like everything
Yeah.
else is a business. And you have to think about like, am I paying myself for what I'm doing right now? And unfortunately, art's one of those things where people, I think they don't think about how much goes into something, because it's not like something that, I don't like to say that art isn't useful. I think it is in terms of like how it makes you feel and like for mental health and stuff. I think art is good.
100%.
But the reality is like if you're tight on money and you have to choose between groceries and a painting, you're going to buy the groceries. And so it's, I can justify my pricing, but I can also fully acknowledge that other people can't justify paying it, which is really difficult, especially in our current our current economy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is why I've been shifting to doing things that are more functional in terms of like storage and boxes and like things that can feel like they can be used. People are much more likely to buy that than something that
Fair.
is purely just to look at. So I try to go more for utility now, just
Mhm.
because people feel better about buying. I do a lot of like pencil cups and desk organizers and stuff, because then people are like, oh, it's okay if I'm buying this because I can use it for something. And yeah,
Yeah. What was
but
And do you
the
find?
oh,
sorry,
sorry.
Oh, go for it, Audrey.
really quickly, what was the first thing? Do you remember the first thing you sold?
I think it was a drawing that I did of like a Zodiac character when I was like 16 or something. I
All
don't remember
right.
specifically, but I think I remember I did this like series of like Zodiac drawings that I found the other day and are garbage, but I thought they were really good when I was like 16. And I don't remember, I was like, it was like a little like outside tiny market thingy. And I was like, I'm selling drawings. And someone bought one. And I was like,
Oh,
There you
this
go.
is garbage.
I could do this for the rest of my life.
And then I did. And then I was like, well, if I could go back in time, I'd punch that kid in the face. Remy,
All
you were
right.
about to ask something
Yeah.
as
Yeah,
well.
I
Yeah.
guess it brought several questions to my mind, but I guess one of the first ones that came up was, is there kind of like a baseline rate that artists kind of think to try to charge? based off of like their time? Because I assume your time is actually the more expensive part of it rather than like the materials in most cases.
Yeah. And also that in and of itself too, you also if I'm doing like a commission for like a set of illustrations, then yes, it's purely based on like I set an hourly rate. Some people do like a project, like expect this project to take 50 hours. And so based on my hourly rate and then maybe a bit of a bulk discount, I would charge this amount. It's a little different when you're selling something reproducible, like when I make a bunch of pins, because it does take me time to make them, but I can cut out like 50 of them at a time. So it's you kind of have to adjust it based on what the project is. I do have a baseline price per hour that varies very specifically person to person, and it's basically what you think your time is worth. I'm not going to go into specifics what my hourly.
Sure.
Well, I guess
Sure.
I could actually. It doesn't really matter. Like my one thing we did learn that I think is a pretty good business thing, like for art, is have like a bit of a range that you're willing to work with, kind of like this is the lowest I'm willing to go, like this is what my ideal rate per hour would be, but I still feel like my time is being well spent if I get paid this much. Because that way, if you're working with somebody who's like on a tighter budget, or somebody who's like, I really need this but I can't quite pay this rate, you're like, you can compromise and kind of help them in a position like where they can afford it without fully compromising like your time. Like you kind of have to be willing to give a little bit. Some people don't do that. Some people are like, this is my rate, that's what it is. I'm a little more flexible with it because sometimes it's like people who need stuff for educational things, or people who need stuff or they want it for like their kids or a fundraiser or something. And I'm like, I will adjust this for you. But like my last freelance gig that I was doing I did it for about 3 years, and I stopped working with him last year. I was getting paid 35 an hour for whatever he needed, basically. And that's because that was like the rate I gave him. And he was like, that's fine, I'll pay it. But there are definitely jobs where I've like dropped down to maybe like 30, maybe even a little bit lower, depending on if it was like a really big project. And like I knew it was going to be like a ton of hours, and like, I don't know. So it really is a little bit dependent on the project and also on the specific like artist. Like I can't say everyone's going to say that. Some people are going to be like, that's way too low. Some people are going to say that's way too high.
Okay.
It's yeah,
Yeah,
but
I mean, it's
based
like
on
any other industry, right?
exactly, yeah. And a lot of it is based on like it's not just that like I'm making this thing. It's not like, oh, why are you charging so much for like paper and paint? It's like, no, you're also paying for the last like 20 years I've spent learning how to do this to make the thing
100%.
that you cannot make on your own and
Yeah.
would like me to do for you. So no, I'm not going to like pay myself $8 an hour for this, like
Totally.
because you want a custom illustration of you at your wedding. Like so and I feel like that again is any industry, like with like the medical field with vets and everything. It's like, yeah, you paid a lot of money and spent a lot of time learning to do the thing that you're doing, and you're charging it because it's a very specialized thing that not everybody can do. So you have to realize that you're also paying for that like knowledge and that ability.
Now, when you say freelance, is this primarily with Fiverr, and or what mediums do most people utilize for freelance art and
I'm
illustration?
gonna I'm gonna be completely honest. Every single like major job I've had in the art field, total happenstance. Like everyone, like I've
Hmm.
had people ask me like, how did you get this job? No clue. My first like graphic design job, like I was an in-house graphic designer, Craigslist. I honestly kind of
Okay.
thought it was a scam, and then I checked it out. I was like, oh, this is real. And they were like, your stuff's cute. You want to work here? And I was like, sure. This sounds great.
Cool. Okay.
And then the last one that I had was I was doing assistant work for a guy who does pop-up books, but like really intense pop-up books, like paper engineering.
That's
I had
cool.
never heard of him. Turns out in the pop-up book industry, he's like famous. Didn't know that. He messaged my profile on LinkedIn, which I didn't even remember I had a LinkedIn. And he was like, I'm looking for an assistant. And I was like, no clue who this guy was. Turned out it was like, I thought he wanted an assistant to like, I don't know, make copies for him or something. No, I ended up helping him do a few different books and stuff. Yeah. So a very small design credit. Obviously he's the main, like,
Still.
but still. So there are like a couple of books at Barnes and Noble where I'm like, my name's in the back of that Harry Potter craft book. My name's in the back of that Pokemon craft book. Like that's pretty cool. But
It's
unfortunately,
really
like I'm up
cool.
here now, he's down in LA, and it's much harder to have a long distance assistant because I used to do a lot of like mock-up work for him. And so he would have to send me stuff so I could like build it and then have to
Mm.
ship it back to him. So he has an assistant like in office again, which I do not blame him for. Like it's
Sure.
freelance. It was on a as needed kind of basis. So there's no, that's one of the downsides is there's not as much job security. It was kind of like, you're my assistant until you're not. And then that's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
Well,
it's not like that for everybody, but that is generally I get reached out to on social media or through apparently LinkedIn. I really should see what's on there
okay.
because it's probably not up to date. Um, but I've gotten really lucky in that sense, but it's different for everybody.
Okay. So good
Awesome.
exposure will essentially get you connections typically.
Yeah, unfortunately, but people want to pay you in that exposure, which is also really frustrating. But yeah,
Oh, I believe that. Oh,
Yeah.
cringe.
mm,
Yeah.
it's the worst.
All right, let's move in. Let's pivot again over here. Tell me about AI and how that's
Mm,
now, because I mean, now I could literally just ask ChatGPT to make me a photo, right?
yep.
How I know, and I've heard obviously you hear a little bit about what artists think about it, but I'd love to hear directly from you. How's that affecting the industry?
Again, I can't speak for every single artist. I think AI as a concept in and of itself could have a lot of benefits in some fields. In
Mm,
art, I think it is a terrible idea. And I think it's just absolutely going to damage the art field because the way AI works in when it creates that photo or when it creates a piece of art or when it creates any kind of image, it doesn't make that out of nowhere. It is sourced from existing material. And I feel like people who aren't the ones making that material don't realize that when this was first happening too, it wasn't super well regulated. So a lot of those databases of like information were just like pulled from the internet from like existing artists. And you see these like really gray area legal battles now of like really obviously stolen AI work from artists. Like they can recognize that their stuff was stolen because those images were pulled from the internet and added to this like bank of millions of pictures. And so when you're making AI art, you're not making art. You're making an amalgam of someone else's hard work. It didn't go to art school to learn those things. It didn't spend its years learning how to do those things.
fair.
It is just a program that takes something that someone else worked really hard on and turned it into a thing. And then you're like, I made art. And it's like, I saw a post somewhere where someone kind of like, it was a really long thing with views about how AI affects art, but it's basically like saying like, I want to make this really cool thing, but I think I'm too good to go and take the time to actually learn how to do it myself. So I'm going to have a computer program do it and then still say that I'm an artist. And you're
Mm,
doing that by jumping off the backs of people who have spent all that time and effort learning how to do it. And I think that's really I just think that's a huge shame and it's really disrespectful to artists and it's really damaging to artists because companies don't care about any of that stuff. They care about maximizing profits. So they don't care about the integrity of it. They care about, oh, AI can do this for me, then we don't have to hire a person. And that's an artist who doesn't have a job now because someone thought it was a good idea to do this. And so while I do think AI has the ability to be good in certain things, I do not think art is one of them. And I think it's actually
okay.
incredibly damaging. And I think people's arguments for why it's good in in art are all very weak arguments. So
Fair.
I personally am very, very, very against it. I think it's just it's not cool. There's no integrity to it. But that doesn't mean AI isn't. It could be good for some other stuff.
Yeah.
Um, probably. I don't know. I don't know a whole
No,
lot
it's
about
that's
like other.
well said. That's very
Yeah.
fair.
And I mean,
Well,
given where things are at now, where do you feel AI needs to go to be respectful of artists' work? Like you said, that it's building on the backs of like all of that time and effort. And part of it's like, okay, well, it's already out of the bag. Like
Mhm.
it's out in society. So it's like,
Yeah.
do we shut it all down? Do we try to credit people appropriately? Like, what do you feel would be the best remedy moving forward?
I mean, in an ideal world, which I understand would never happen, but since it is out there, I do feel like I'll admit I'm not super familiar with like the specific AI programs people are using because I tend to avoid all of that. I just don't like it as a concept. But these existing image banks that exist now, I do think those should be scrapped. And if you're going to be teaching AI, it should from be it excuse me, should be from a source that has art that has been given willingly
hmm.
or has been paid for. Like I think there needs to be like verified sources for that art to pull from where it's like something that's in public domain or stuff that has been allowed to be put there, not something that's just been like scraped from the internet. So if it's going to be respectable and be used as like an educational tool, I think it needs to be done in a way that can actually be monitored and in a way where if something falls through the cracks, like a person can like apply for like copyright infringement or trademark infringement or something and actually be able to talk to a person who can be like, oh, yeah, yes, I looked at this. I can see your art was used without permission. We are taking this down from the site now. Like it needs to be done in a way that actually respects the work of living artists, because this isn't to say that it can't be used as a learning tool. Like it could help with setting up compositions. It could help teach certain stuff, and like you could use public domain art for that, or art that's like classical art and stuff like that. Like fine, whatever. Like no one's gonna think that you're the one who originally painted the Mona Lisa. Like it's cool, like whatever. But it needs to be done in a way that doesn't damage people who are trying to make a living off their own art who don't use AI.
So I guess that kind of brings up a follow-up question. That this may be a bit of a weird hypothetical, but say you scraped all of the copyrighted IP out of the training sets. Like it's literally only, like you said, public and non-copyrighted art used for training. And say hypothetically, if that's able to be used in a manner to where the output could theoretically become any type of art, like say you're able to replicate any form of art without having to use that training set. So effectively the output is the same as what we are already doing now. How, because I guess it sounds like I agree with you that like stealing IP is not good. But on the flip side of it, if someone is able to do that without it, to me, it still feels like there's still such a negative impact on the art world.
Oh, absolutely.
And, you know, it's like the defense that they're going to have is like, well, we're not using any of your guys' stuff. We don't have to have any sort of attribution. But if it's like functionally identical, like where do we go with that?
Oh, absolutely. And that's a really good point. And I think the problem with like, it's really easy to focus on the IP thing because that's a thing with like tangible consequences that tangibly harms people and you can point it out. And when you get to this idea of, okay, well, we can make it without stealing people's art, it gets a little more of a gray area because it comes down to kind of like morals and ethics and stuff like that, where it's like, fine, you did technically make something that didn't technically steal from anyone, but you didn't actually make it. But at the end of the day, who are you to tell someone that their art, I guess, isn't real art? But I think it also depends on how you're going to use it, because like you start to see those like headlines of like someone used AI to make this painting or whatever, and it wins like an art competition and they get $10,000 for it. It's like, okay, you shouldn't be allowed to do that. You should have to specify that you made it with AI. That should have to be a very huge part of the branding and marketing of it, of like, I didn't technically do this, it was AI generated. Like, I think it needs to be in a separate category, because when it's not, a lot of times people can't tell that it's AI, or they just assume that a person was able to make it. And so I do think it should have to be labeled as such. Like it has to kind of be seen as art, but recognized as something completely different. Like it can be an aspect of art, but like I don't think people should act kind of like I made this. It's like it should have to be labeled for what it is, which is generative art, which is not the same thing. And I think it should be kept out of certain categories that other art is in, like art competitions and things like that, or things that are based on artistic technique and quality. Like I don't think that should be up against people who are actually making artwork.
Yeah, I agree with that. You know, I think that makes sense. And my hope is honestly in the future, like we're gonna move in that direction, right? That the AI art's just gonna get so cheapened.
Yeah.
You're gonna
but like no one uses it. So it's like
value exactly a human doing it.
I mean, fingers crossed, but also like we're heading towards just like a total apocalypse with like no like electricity or anything, and all we're gonna have is cave drawings, and then traditional art's gonna come back, and we'll be solid again.
When we come back in, post back on Instagram, it'll be back too. All right, well, here, let's make the switch. Let's give Kirsten the floor. What questions do you have for us as veterinarians?
I actually have a couple, but I think this is just something that like it's kind of a sad topic, but I find it interesting. So I had mentioned to you, I wanted to be a vet when I was a kid. I loved animals, and I was like, this is great. This is what I want to do. And then the realization that one day you're going to have a sick animal, or an animal that needs to be put down, or someone like animals die. And how do you kind of cope with that emotional aspect of it? Because obviously it's like with a patient in any medical field where you have to have some distance, but like I find it kind of inconceivable that you couldn't have some kind of emotional connection with that animal. And seeing that so regularly, I imagine that has a really difficult impact.
That's a really good question. Remy, what do you want me to take this, or you want to take it?
Whatever you want.
Uh, well, if you have a few,
I feel like our answers are probably gonna be pretty similar.
our answers are probably pretty similar because we both work in ER. I'll take
Yeah.
this one.
Yeah.
Also,
And
I
then
like how
Remy, you
he's
can
just sitting there grinning. I'm like, how do you feel about animals dying? And he's just like
No,
sitting there
it's
grinning,
just
like,
because
whoa, whoa.
I've heard this
well,
question a lot,
yeah,
and it's
yeah.
I
we
figured
we
you
know.
would. Yeah.
Well, funny enough, I mean, sometimes that's just how we cope with it too. There's a level
Yeah.
of humor to darkness like that. I think from the get-go, some people can cope and some people can't. I think that if you look into mental health in the professional field, the number of suicide and those with depression, you'd see veterinarian very close to the top of the list, and it's because of these situations like this. There's a couple categories in terms of your first euthanasia, helping as a technician, and then your 1000th euthanasia. Right. Of course, working in ER, we've done this, probably over in the four digits. For me, I think there's a lot of justification. It makes me feel, when in many cases, there's an animal that's very sick, and humane euthanasia gives them this level of relief and it stops the suffering. So it makes me, that's how I'm able to kind of tell myself that this is the right decision. Actually, in our last one of our last podcasts where we talked about people who primarily do euthanasia as their job as veterinarians, there really is an art to that specific role, because it's not just like the actual procedure itself is relatively straightforward. You give injections, but the ability to emotionally connect with the situation and fundamentally understand the disease process is probably the biggest part, right? And Remy, you said this really well. It's like, there's so many like animals that we've seen that we've treated for whatever disease, but the ones that stand out to us the most are the ones that we've euthanized with owners, because we've developed a connection, and that level of bond and is really, it's an incredibly highly emotional thing. For me, I've had my first pet that I euthanized obviously was my own when I was 17, and that was a German Shepherd. So all German Shepherds that I euthanize, I think of Richie, and you can't help but tear up a little bit, and when it's a 17-year-old kid, and I reflect on myself, there's special little parts that kind of hit me different. But I think a
Because you
big
know
part
how it
is
feels. Yeah.
exactly, and we have to really, unfortunately, we have to sometimes just really compartmentalize it and almost bury it down. There's so many scenarios. I think this is the hardest part, is you spend hours on a case that doesn't succeed. I think just 2 weeks ago, and this is one that still is very fresh in my mind, I spent 6 hours trying to stabilize this patient. The owner luckily was very nice and understanding, and it got to a point where I realized, what, this pet is suffering, the outcome does not look good, and we decided to stop. And I still think about the pet daily, and it's so hard not to think about that and feel terribly. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with everything you said. Yeah. I mean, it's, I guess, to kind of rephrase what Alfred said, there's definitely, I think the perspective that I have on it is like when you're in situations that either result in like euthanasia or just sad outcomes in general, I think the way I always look at it is we're already in that situation, right? And it's usually one where they're going to pass away and it's not going to be in a good manner. And euthanasia is a way to prevent them from suffering in that
Yeah.
way. And you also have a way to try to make the event as good as possible given the circumstances, right? So you
Yeah.
give the family some time to say goodbye and have a peaceful process.
Hmm.
And there's definitely an art to it, like Alfred said,
Hmm.
that it can be some of the moments that you have with the clients that are saying goodbye to their pets can be some of the most memorable ones. That it's really a personal experience, and I
Hmm.
think to some degree the compartmentalization I think helps not feel the degree of sadness that they are every
Hmm.
single time. Because if you think about it, like that's the one of the worst days of their life, right?
Yeah.
And if you feel that same amount of emotion multiple times a day, every single day you show up to work, like that's just not a sustainable thing. So
Hmm.
I think it helps to focus in on like, how can I help ease the pain that everyone's feeling, like try to help make things a little bit better.
Yeah.
And, as long as you really focus in on that, I think it can make things better. You get a little bit of a healthier perspective on it, I'd say.
Yeah. It's definitely
That's
hard
really cool.
because you'll go into a situation where you end up euthanizing a patient, and then you have another patient waiting, and then you have to just shut that down and then go back and say, "Hey guys, I'm Dr.
Mhm.
Tam,
Yeah.
and this is a puppy now, and we're like dealing." So you have to kind of really try to shift that's probably one of the hardest parts about our
Yeah, it's
job.
tough.
Yeah.
That actually, I was gonna ask, like, what do you think the hardest part of your job is? But I feel like that ties into what we were talking about like people not realizing aspects of a job because they think vet, you work with animals, blah, blah. But like the amount of like emotional intelligence you have to have a job like that, like I find it incredibly impressive because like, can you imagine how horrible it would be if you were in there with a pet who was about to be euthanized and the vet was like, okay, well, we need to get this over with. It's like, oh my God. Every single time, like I've had to go through something like that or anything that traumatic that's happened with a pet, like having a very caring team was what made it as tolerable as it could be in that time. And so I can't imagine like dealing with that and then immediately having to go and like be totally cool with someone. And like I do remember that a bit from when I was at the vet office where like we'd be in the back and like I was back there getting paperwork and we're dealing with all of this kind of stuff and then I come out and someone's like, I'm here to like, register my new kitten and I'm just like, oh, okay, come on
You're
in.
right.
Yeah.
It's just, you have to flip it. It's hard. Yeah.
Exactly. So like to actually have to be the one in the room to do that kind of thing, like I don't think people realize like how much that could take out of a person, but also like how much a part of your job that is. Like I don't think
Yeah.
people think about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to, I mean, I think it's the same thing for people who purchase art, right? I mean, you only see the emotion or the finished product. You don't think about the journey of school and the amount of time and emotion you put into it, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And so, I mean, which is fair. I mean, like if someone's not in an industry, you can't expect them to know all the ins and outs of it. But I do think it's good to talk about these kinds of things because it makes it easier for people to kind of, I think the whole concept of understanding where other people is coming from is something that's severely lacking in our society in general. Like
mhm.
I have a huge problem with how single-minded people can be, especially because we live in a society where our a lot of people feel like their entire purpose in life is to project a certain image, whether it's on the internet or mostly on the internet, but is to project a certain image of their life being curated in a certain kind of way. And that really minimizes your life to like one or two aspects. And it's the same with like a career. Like on the internet, I look like a successful artist. I post only finished stuff that looks really nice. And I'm not posting like my garbage sketchbooks that are full of stuff that I hate. I'm not posting like I've been pretty open with my followers about having poor mental health. Like I have ADHD, I have anxiety, I have depression, all that kind of stuff. But I don't post about it all the time because if I did, it'd be like my biggest accomplishment today was I got up and took a shower and that was it because I just like I it's inconsistent work. Some months I get paid really well, and then you have to carry that until your next big gig. That's how it is. It's not a consistent paycheck. And so if it's been a slow month, I'm just like, I am very unhappy right now. I am going to lie on the couch and stare at the ceiling for like 2 hours. And like you don't show that because that's not what people want to see. They want to see your art or they want to see the
Yeah,
cute pictures of the dogs or they want to see like whatever. Like and I get that, but like everyone thinks like because that's all we project, that that's the entirety of anyone's career or personality. And like it makes it really hard, I think, to relate to other people because you're either comparing yourself to them or judging them. And it's like,
yeah. Well
this is
said.
how we like dehumanize people. And it's like, no,
Yeah, that is definitely the toxicity of social media that I
it's
feel.
the worst. I want to
Yeah,
get off of it. I hate it so much.
it's addicting though, isn't it?
It is. Oh my God, there's so much good stuff to watch
I
on there. It's
know.
so terrible.
You got any other questions for us?
Yeah. So how do I phrase this? So like actually two questions now. So you
Okay.
guys were in ER. When was the first time you like realized and acknowledged how you responded in like a super high intensity situation? Like, is that something you prepared for in school, or was it like first day on the job, someone comes in, their leg's been cut off, and you're like, oh God. Like, when was the moment you realized how you respond to a situation like that?
That's a really good. I don't think anyone's ever asked that. I
Yeah,
don't think we've ever
that's a
even
good
thought
one.
about. That's a good one. Remy,
It's a question I think some still need to ask themselves,
super
right?
true.
Yeah, I mean, I think to some degree you get a little bit of an idea before you graduate. At least I would hope you do.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's definitely opportunities like in your fourth year of clinics where you're gonna be kind of on the clock to figure out, what am I gonna decide for this case? How am I gonna respond to the situation? I mean, there are gonna be those opportunities. I would say once you're out in practice, it definitely gets a lot more real, right? Because
Oh yeah.
it's on you. Yeah, I think it's kind of like any other industry. School's going to teach you only so much, and you can learn the didactic portion of it, but then when it actually comes to the art of practicing, you kind of just find your rhythm on how you do things.
Mhm.
I think for me personally, I'm very much in the camp that when things get serious, I tend to like bring down the level of chaos. I try to keep people from getting really worked up about things because I find that
Mhm.
it slows down your ability to respond effectively, right?
Yeah.
Like you become less productive if you're amped up on stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I want to say that there's like a phrase, I don't know if it comes from the military or something. It's like slow is smooth and smooth is fast or something to that effect.
Sure.
I mean,
That
granted,
sounds
we're
good.
not moving slowly, but
You
I've definitely
must learn the rules before you break them.
You can break them. Just say
Yeah.
that I came up with it. Just say you came up with that. It's fine. Just say it confidently, and people will be
Yeah.
like, "Oh yeah, that was
No, I
really
heard it
deep."
from somewhere. No, but it's I've definitely worked with people that were not suited well to high intensity environments.
And that's why I can't be a vet.
No, I mean I think
That's a good
it's something
acknowledgement,
that
I
you
guess. Yeah.
just
Oh yeah, I know what my limits are, and that's one of them.
yeah. But like I said, I mean, at least for me, it's always focusing on what do I know that can help make the situation better. And a lot of times it's incremental improvements, right? So it's like,
Mhm.
okay, what can we fix right here, right now? What are we not able to fix right here and right now? And let's focus
Mhm.
on the things that we can change. And then once we get over that, then oftentimes you feel a little bit better about the situation and then you move on to the next stuff, right?
Yeah.
But yeah. I mean, what are your thoughts, Alfred?
Yeah, I agree. I think fortunately in vet school or medical school or even whatever, kind of medical profession you enter, ideally in your last couple of years. And so in vet school, most people, it's going to be your fourth year where the first 3 years, you're kind of doing your classwork and your tests and all that. And then your last year, you're actually in the clinical hospital where you're essentially, I don't know, shadowing, assisting, whatever you want to put it, where we're part of the treatment facility, right? And the
Mhm.
team. And we actually are involved in cases. So in our ER rotations, I guess, especially in these more high intensity, life threatening situations, we were exposed to a few. Now, depending on your luck or whatever you choose for your electives, you might be exposed to only a week during this whole time or this whole year, right? Others who are really heavy into ER might be longer. So I think my biggest oh shit moment or it might be my first oh shit moment outside of it was I remember it was a Rottweiler that came in that was hit by
Oh.
a car. And I think Remy and I are very similar where you kind of just kind of quiet your surroundings and you try to really simplify what needs to happen. And fortunately with, I guess CPR specifically, there's a relatively straightforward process of how you do this, right? There's
Mhm.
there's the get a catheter in for venous access, you
Mhm.
you intubate them for airway and you start chest compressions, right? From there you can add in injections or whatnot, but that's kind of the basics of CPR. So
Mhm.
I remember that was the first time. That was before I entered ER. I was in general practice,
Mhm.
and the owners came in and they were watching me do this.
Oh
And
God.
I'm like less than a year out, and again, you focus on the basics. Unfortunately, and this kind of goes into actually the benefit of owners being there because they actually get to witness you the efforts. They see the sweat from the staff as they're
Yeah.
pumping blood through, in the chest of this
Yeah.
150-pound Rottweiler. So they ended up very much understanding the fact that we weren't successful in reviving the dog. But as Remy was saying, that was the first to specifically answer your question, that was the first kind of moment that I had.
Yeah.
And from there, you really reflect on the experience. Of course, you kind of shake off the emotions, very much like the euthanasia thing. We're dealing with death, so you kind of have to compartmentalize that. But then you
Yeah.
reflect on how you essentially could have done better. You go back through the process of what was done right, and
Yeah.
again, the next time there's going to be different outliers that you then reflect on.
Yeah.
So
And then
over
eventually you
time,
have like a catalog of
eventually,
like, yeah.
eventually you're dead inside.
I'm sure that was
Just like with
nerve-wracking
artists.
for having the clients right there as you were doing CPR. I have to say, I like having pet owners there because there's less room for misunderstanding. I think it's
Exactly.
a
Yeah.
better situation, but not all
Yep.
hospitals allow that to happen. But
Yeah.
I'm just imagining in Alfred's shoes. I mean, especially if you're
A
new
new grad.
and they're watching you do CPR, that's nerve-wracking.
No.
But
Oh, that does
yeah,
sound
I mean, after a
super,
while you
super
get used to
nerve-wracking.
it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And it's better, I think, to
Yeah.
have them
Agreed.
there.
Agreed.
I think
But
so, because when it comes to something like medical careers, I feel like so much stuff happens behind closed doors and people don't know it because they're not part of it. And
Mhm.
so it's really easy to like imagine these scenarios of what's happening to your pet behind those closed doors. And so when they can actually witness it, not only do they see the process, but they see your efforts. And I feel like that makes a huge difference because we definitely had this one lady who she was a peach, but like she had this dog who had come in, had been injured, and he treated the wound, and like I think there were some stitches involved, whatever, sent the dog on his way afterwards. And she came back and insisted that the wound was like bigger than it had been, and that the dog had been hurt there, like in the room when she wasn't there, and it looked like a burn. So the doctor had clearly spilled like acid on the dog. And I was like, okay, one, what lab do you think we're in? They're
I
just
know.
vials of acid just sitting around that we could just spill onto a dog. But also, no, that's literally the wound that it was treated. But she had like convinced herself because it didn't look right to her, and she hadn't been in there because like she didn't want to be in there, and I don't think she would have been allowed in anyways because the rooms were too small. But because she hadn't seen it, she had envisioned what could have potentially happened, and she tried litigation, and like it didn't work. But like people care a lot about their animals, and when they can't see what's happening and it's not the outcome they hoped for, I do feel like they fill in the blanks with like worst case scenario, and the doctor's the easiest person to point the finger at because it's somehow their fault, which I mean, I'm sure sometimes
Totally.
it is, but like yeah, like, and I understood it to a degree. I didn't understand why she insisted that we had spilled acid on him because again, I don't know like why we would just have a jar of acid out, but like I do think that like interaction with patients makes it easier for them to understand.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
100%. And
I
you
mean,
actually touched on something.
I carry my vial of acid with me around
It's
my
like
neck
all
wherever I
around. It's not
go.
just sitting
So
out.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on something that I think is actually one of the less commonly known tougher parts of the job, which is like going into a room with pet owners and not knowing them ahead of time at all, right? Like people are very different actually in terms of, their expectations and, how they gain trust with people. And, at the extreme ranges, you can have someone that if it's more than $20, they feel like you're ripping them off. You're just trying to
Mhm.
convince them to do stuff that's not necessary. And then you have, the opposite extreme is someone who's willing to pay 20,000 and anything less than the absolute perfect gold standard. To them, they're like, that's completely unacceptable, right? But then if you switch your recommendations for each one of those, right, it would just completely blow things apart.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of like finding that where people meet you in terms of what their expectations are.
Mhm.
And on the flip side, just having that trust within a short period of time, especially in ER,
Yeah.
because especially, if the ER is really busy and, these days ERs tend to be very understaffed and they've been waiting several hours before they even see you. Usually they don't want to be there. They're not happy to show up at whatever time of the
Mhm.
day to be at a pet ER.
Mhm.
And then on top of that, they've been waiting and then you show up, they're already not super happy. Right.
Yeah.
And especially if there's other things going on that,
Mhm.
for patient privacy purposes, you can't always explain something that
Like
may be rushing you that you need to handle if it's another patient that's on death's doorstep or whatever.
yeah.
That's stuff you have to juggle. And, you know, I've definitely wished that, you know, at some of the hospitals I've worked at, like we could have kind of more of an open environment where everyone can kind of have a better awareness of
Hmm.
everything going on. Because, like I said, the trust thing is something that you try your best with everybody, but
Yeah.
people have different
Well, of
styles of
course.
communication and how that
Yeah.
works.
And also, like for everyone, like who goes there, no matter what the situation is, their pet is the one who has the problem. They're not in the position where you are to see everybody. It's like because
Yeah.
they don't know what's going on. And like I've spent a fair amount of time in ERs. I had a dog who used to, despite our best efforts, ingest literally anything, including bees, and she would like allergic reaction all the time. And we're just like, stop it.
Oh.
But she was a good dog, but she ate like a $20 bill once, and I was like, dude. But she like so we were in there a lot, and like yeah, it was super frustrating, and like it took conscious effort to be like, it's not their fault if they're not seeing me. It's not because they're having a laugh about me sitting out here for hours. It's because there's probably someone who's like in cardiac arrest or bleeding out or something, and like she's
Yeah.
super
Sounds
itchy,
about right.
but like she's fine, she's breathing. So it's like we wait, drink the crappy coffee, and just deal. But like it took conscious effort because after 4 hours, you're like, I want to go home.
Yeah.
So I
Well,
get it, but
the thing that gets really tough to fight against is if there's, you know, because obviously there's different people in different roles in a vet
mhm,
hospital.
yeah.
The times where there is like someone who's like a rotating student or, you know, just
Mhm.
volunteering, shadowing, whatever, and they're just hanging out and they start like laughing over something. And obviously that person can't help anything go faster,
Yeah.
but everybody hears that person laughing. That irks me because it's like no one wants to feel like people are just sitting back there
Like bumming
having a
around.
good time, but
Yeah.
it's tough because that destroys credibility faster than anything, right?
Oh, I can
And
totally see
it
that. Yeah.
just yeah, and it's something that I don't think is emphasized enough in vet hospitals. Is like
Hmm.
even if you're working as hard as you can, the perception that you're not is going to completely ruin, you know,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
interaction.
I don't know why people tend to assume people are not doing the best that they can. And maybe some people
Right.
aren't, but I do feel like it's a less miserable existence to assume people are just doing the best that they can. Like, I mean, if I'm proven wrong, fine, but like I don't think I'd want to go into something assuming that people are out to get me or purposely doing their worst. Like, because that
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense to me. So I just
Yeah.
feel like in general, people would probably be just like kind of happier if they assumed people were just doing their best and have that be okay, have that be enough. But I don't know.
That's the
I
hope.
am
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am ever hopeful for stuff like
Yeah.
that. So yeah.
All right. Did you say you had another question afterwards, or?
Oh yeah. What's the like, weirdest thing that you've ever seen come in? Like if you can talk about it. I know there's patient
Of course.
confidentiality, but has anyone come in with their dog like stuck in a tin can or something? Like
Oof. Oh, there's some weird things. Let's see.
uh,
I mean, we're in Florida, by the way. Okay, so there's some weird owners. Okay. I mean, the
do they
number
bring
of
in
people
anything besides like cats and dogs and stuff? Do people have weird are weird pets allowed in
there
Florida?
there are, but fortunately, I'm strictly cat and dog, so I don't see
Cool.
any other kind of exotic animals. So
Okay.
I've had a couple things that like a bird that I had to put down just because, and I wasn't just gonna like not do that if it was suffering.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I wasn't. Yeah, I don't treat anything aside from
No like alligators or anything.
no, thank goodness.
Whatever they have there.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've several, I would say that, yeah, none that just for patient privacy
Of
purposes. I
course.
don't think I
okay.
have any that I can,
Which I
nothing
totally
that comes to
understand.
mind that would be safe for that. But
Yeah.
Yeah,
yes,
there.
we do see some very strange
Yeah,
things.
well,
I kind of figured.
there are some cool learning experience ones. There's ones where like a dog had ingested a skewer
Wow.
and it didn't show up on x-rays, it didn't show up on our ultrasound
It's
just because
frustrating.
the little wooden skewer is broken into a small part, but it ended up
Hmm.
perforating a part of the
The
gut.
CTA.
So we had
Ooh.
to see, and so that's like I was like, oh, you learned CT, and fortunately our hospital
Hmm.
had it. And that was a really interesting one. There was another one, similar skewer, but it instead of traveling down and actually travel up to the thorax and actually punctured into
Ooh.
the heart, which was crazy.
Oh my
Um,
God.
there was one where there was a gentleman who wore shorts into the hospital. Has something to do with his pet. He didn't he didn't wear underwear.
Oh God.
And the reason why we also knew this is because there was a probably like a 4-inch hole in the middle
Ooh.
of his pants. So I don't know if crazy
Like
or
intentionally,
weird.
like what?
I have
I'm
no
assuming he
idea.
didn't notice, but like,
Maybe
oh
he
my
didn't notice. I mean, I don't want to go into
God.
like socioeconomic stuff, but maybe that maybe he didn't have the means. But that was an interesting
This is the
one.
stuff
Just
you don't sign up
Just
for.
like whenever you
yeah,
see unexpected, just like groin, like anytime in life, that's just like
yeah,
jarring, no matter the
yeah.
situation. Why did I ask?
Huh. Well,
Oh,
I
but yeah, there
frankly I think it's
were
art,
definitely.
but
I think it's beautiful.
yeah.
But yeah, I think
So,
I think that pretty
okay,
much covered it because like
okay.
I think it's really interesting because I do love animals so much, but like I can't deal with it emotionally. Like I was trying to explain the plot of Homeward Bound to my boyfriend for the first time and I started crying and I was like, thank God we live together already because we're like locked in, but like ugh, not a good look.
Do you watch
So
Avatar: The Last Airbender? Did you ever watch that?
the cartoon, yes, not the live
Yes.
action.
Okay.
I have
So
thoughts about it.
my wife and I are currently watching it, and I told her get ready for season 2 when they talk about Appa's personal story.
Appa's
She's gonna
uh,
bawl her eyes out. So,
we both
anyways,
cried. We both
I'm
cried.
I
I made him
cry
watch
just
it.
thinking about it. Just
It's so
thinking about it, I
sad.
cry.
Oh yeah, that's my thing. Anything with sad, any animal, weeping, just weeping.
Yeah.
So I realized pretty quickly that I wasn't cut out for anything except petting animals. That's about it. So
Me too. No.
yeah.
All right, Remy, you want to start up the Oma sarcoma?
My sarcomas, I'm not prepared for my sarcoma. Uh,
That's a good one.
yeah. Are we starting with sarcomas then?
We usually start with Omas, and then everyone
Okay,
usually
then
does a
my
round of
oma.
yeah.
Well, spoilers. Um, I guess my oma is I'm gonna go watch the solar eclipse because my
Whoa,
family lives in the path. So hopefully it's not gonna be
oh,
cloudy because I've never seen a solar
that'd be
eclipse.
pretty.
So yeah,
Oh, nice.
Oh,
When are you
I'm
going?
that's a
so
gamble.
jealous.
But
It's
When are you
on
going?
the 8th, isn't it? It's
Oh,
on the 8th, I think.
of
yeah, it's the
6th.
eighth.
My
April.
boyfriend's
Okay.
going. I am not
Yeah.
because I have work and
Oh,
appointments, but his family has a house in Buffalo and that's in the path. So he's going out to see it. He's like, "Do you mind if I
super
fly out for a few
cool.
days?" And I'm like, "Cool, I'm gonna be working and hanging out with the cat, but that's fine."
That's
Oh,
Um,
basically how it went in my
oh,
house.
I'm so jealous. Oh my God. So I
that's
hope
a
it's
good
not cloudy
one.
for you because that's gonna
Yeah,
be
Yeah,
super cool.
I'm excited.
yeah.
I
Kristen, what's
think
your
that'll
Oma?
be uh when you originally asked me this, it was something that sounded nice and intellectual, which was I've gotten really into like commonplace book and journaling, like writing down like
Hell
passages and
yeah.
like but last week the Stardew Valley 1.6 update came out and all I've been doing is playing Stardew Valley for like a week. I
What's
put in
on?
like 35 hours.
I didn't even know they're still updating that game.
Dude, it's like a new game. He put out
Really?
so much. I started a new save file. It's literally like playing a new game and I've been playing since it came out. It's so much. It's like twice as much stuff now. Like it is wild. It's only out on like for PC right now. It's not on Switch yet, but like
What?
so I was like it can't be that different. Started playing, haven't really stopped playing. So my thing is I've just spent the last like week staring at a
Okay.
screen and I feel kind of bad, but like not bad enough to not continue doing it. Yeah.
All right, I
So
gotta
that
check
is
out the
my life right
update.
now.
I've
It's
tried to play it 3
so
times.
good.
I can't get into it. I don't know if it's just the
Oh
game type.
man.
I just can't do it. But
It
I've
might
tried.
be for me. It's just like such an escape of like maybe someday I can own property too.
Mm.
Like that would be amazing. So
Come
it's,
to Florida.
but yeah. Oh no, I refuse to ever step foot in Florida. Sorry, no offense.
No, no, you're good. I
Live in
kind
a
of get it.
swamp.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good without the
Well,
swamping.
enjoy it. That sounds like a fun time. My Oma is I actually just finished my last 3-day stretch of overnights. So a little bit of current update with my life is I'm starting to kind of decrease the amount of practice I'm doing.
Mhm,
So most shifts are essentially 3 to 4 shifts a week, three
mhm.
12 hours or 4 10s like most people. So I've been
Okay.
doing 3 nights back to back to back for a while. And so now my wife is finished with her residency. So now she's starting to do it. So I'm going to start doing other projects and other things and kind of take a little bit away from my overnight. So last week was my last 3 night overnight in a row. I'm gonna trigger the little thumbs up, and if sometimes you get a 2, and my thing goes, it has a
How do you
good
make it do the
time.
other
There it
things?
is,
There you go.
and I'm excited. I have a 2-day this week, and then after that, I'm
Mhm.
doing once a week, and I'm I'm psyched. It's just a
That's
good
so
time.
awesome. That's so great.
Congratulations.
I'm
Thanks,
all for
man.
working less. That's my favorite.
Exactly. Right. All right, and then here we'll snake back. I'll do my sarcoma, Kirsten. You do sarcoma, and then we'll finish it with Remy. Okay.
Cool.
My sarcoma. I I have an issue with currently on social media with a lot of what we call fear mongers. So I've been trying, since COVID. I mean, who's gained weight during COVID? I've been trying to like get back into where I was beforehand. So a big things like diet and workouts and all this. And when you go on social media, just because of the algorithm that I've been allowing, you'll have a lot of people now saying, hey, this is terrible for you, hey, this is terrible for you, this will give you cancer, this will kill you. And it's like fruit or
Yeah.
like this all carnivore diet, only beef testicles is the only way humans are meant to survive. And it's just like, it's so frustrating because it's saturated with that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm getting tired of that. That's my sarcoma.
I think that's fair.
That's fair.
Yeah, don't take medical advice from people on TikTok. It's not a good idea unless they're like a doctor or something.
I'm on my 8th beef testicle and I'm just sick of it.
I'm so tired. I haven't seen any results. Where are my abs? I was told this would work. Oh my gosh. I think okay, so when you like posited this and I was like trying to think about like what am I like unhappy with right now, literally the only thing that popped into my mind is just like the concept of capitalism in general. Like, and I feel like everything it is because, and it's, I realized it because it's entrenched in literally everything. Like, I cannot do anything, go online, do any work, do anything without it just being entrenched with this idea that it needs to be marketed and sold. And there's nothing more like soul crushing than everything that you love doing being like wrapped up in, but can I monetize this? And I realized that because that's been like super heavy on my mind lately, but that's specifically for art. But in general, this like marketing of like consumerism and capitalism and all this kind of stuff. So you see like on TikTok, these people who are like punching each other to get those Stanley cups from Target kind of thing. And just like this thing of like owning stuff and spending money and buying all these things, like everything being wrapped up in that. Like every time I see it, it just makes me like, I kind of just want to like curl in on myself. It's just so like just this notion, because like me and my boyfriend were talking, we were just, I just want to be able to like make the stuff I like and have that be enough. But no, it's not. I have to go sell it. I have to go peddle my stuff on the streets when I just want to paint stuff and make weird little wood boxes. But instead I have to make money off people and then go use that money to buy a Stanley Cup or something. So yeah, my thing is just like we spend too much money on stuff we don't need and put too much pressure to make money off things that we should just be enjoying.
That's a really good one. That's fair.
Have you traveled internationally at all?
Only a little bit. I've been to Ireland and like Mexico and Canada. Not a whole lot though.
That helps. Like when you get that feeling where you're like, oh, it's just buying too many things, like being advertised too much. I feel like it helps to just kind of like get a different perspective from a different part of the world where you can't read the advertisements. You don't know what's being sold to you, right? And then I feel like it helps to kind of even the keel again a little bit
and get out of that or just like move into the woods. I'm in Portland, so there's a lot. I just want to like go live in the woods where I don't have to buy anything and just live in a cave. It sounds so relaxing.
Just get your little solar panels on your roof.
Heck yeah, man. Go off the grid, start my own commune out there. Not a cult, just a commune.
Yeah, same thing. The Winkle BB cult.
I'm not saying I've thought about it a lot. I am saying I have a bartering system already worked out fully, but I do think a bartering system is better for society anyways. It's a whole thing. I've had a very long debate with someone about this, but that's for a different podcast.
I'll see you on some posters in the news eventually.
Portland woman found in woods won't leave.
I mean, at that point, you have to ask which, right?
Yeah. I like
so
all
many
of them.
people living in the woods.
That's all we want up here. That's all we want is Subarus and to live in the woods.
Right.
That's fair. That's fair.
That's true. But Kirsten, thank you so much for being a part of this. It really means a lot. You know, a random dude from high school messages you 16 years later saying, "Hey, do you want to be on a podcast with 20 listeners?" And you're fantastic. Honestly, it's.
Well, thank you for asking me. Unfortunately for you, I love to hear myself talk. So this was just a wonderful opportunity for me to just talk about art stuff for a while.
Awesome.
So you picked
Love
the
your
right person.
Yeah. So that's Winkle B. Yeah. Winkle BB
I was
on
just going to
Instagram.
say thank you.
Yeah. Winkle BB on Instagram, winklebb.com.
You can definitely make that sound smoother in post.
Winkle B.
Winkle BB, yeah.
Okay. If anyone who's in the Portland area or is going to be heading over there soon, where can they find you in person?
Just wandering around. No, I am.
Would you like a pin?
Please, someone buy things. I have to feed my cat. I have to send her to college. I'm getting back into doing some shows and stuff. So I am going to be selling at the Crafty Wonderland Spring Market May 8th and 9th, I believe, at the Portland Convention Center. So that's my next upcoming one. And then also I don't know. That's my main show that I'm focused on right now. And then I just do freelance stuff. I post stuff online. So my social media is the best place. It's Winkle BB on literally everything. And I post updates there and also like new product updates for my shop and things like that. So yeah, if anyone wants to check any of that out, it's all on the internet.
Yeah, guys. All right. I love it. Well, hey, again, thank you so much. We'll catch you later.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining.
Bye, you guys. Thank you.